Thank you, everyone, for being here. I know we have a very diverse group, and that's so exciting to see. I'm Sherri Greenberg. I'm a professor of practice at the LBJ School of Public Affairs and assistant dean for state and local government engagement. I also have the privilege of being on the Good Systems executive team and now am former chair, as of September 1st, of Good Systems. Luis Sentis is now chair of Good Systems. On behalf of Good Systems, which is the Interdisciplinary Ethical AI Research Grand Challenge, that's a mouthful, at UT Austin, I'd like to welcome you to the roundtable event that we're hosting, Trusting AI, How Transparency Accelerates Successful Human, notice I said human, AI Partnerships. This event was organized in collaboration with our partners at the Cantellus Group and Good Tech Advisory. Thank you to Karen, Rebecca, Nancy, and Kay for your support. We are very, very appreciative of your support. Of course, couldn't have done this without you. We are so thrilled to bring a dynamic group of experts who you see here together today to discuss a topic that is top of mind for many of us in an election year and near and dear to my heart as we approach a legislative session here in Texas, which will begin in January, the biennial legislative session. What does it take to earn trust, and how can we work together across sectors to build trusted human AI systems that benefit society? Trust, that's an important word. Trust, I think, is fundamental to all of us in our lives and in everything we do. And certainly, I think that trust is really the foundation for AI. It is foundational with AI to have trust, and from that, trustworthiness. Because without trust, we cannot take advantage of the promises of AI, and we also have to be aware, of course, of some of the perils. So trust is the essential foundation when we talk about AI and society and policy and so many other issues. And when we want AI systems to benefit society, we start from that foundation of trust. And then we have to consider, how does trust enter in with transparency and agency, right? We've all talked about responsible AI and ethical AI, and we start with trust. And without trust, you cannot do anything. But I think to have trust, you must have transparency, right? For people to trust in what's going on with your AI, there must be transparency, not the black box, but actually getting behind the black box, not having the black box, understanding the algorithms, if there's bias, wanting to know what that is and how to alleviate it if possible. And without trust and transparency, I don't think you can have agency. So we start with trust, we have transparency, and then I think we need agency, right? As humans in the loop, as human beings, we need to know that we have some agency over what we're doing with AI, right? That we have the transparency to know, is our data being used? How's it being used? Can we have control over that data? And so many other aspects of AI. So agency is also fundamental when we talk about AI and society. And how can we be more transparent when it comes to the design, deployment, and use of AI technologies? AI for the benefit of society, socio-technical methods. And when we talk about that, of course, we all know that we use in research qualitative methods, but also we use quantitative, both of those. And when we're looking at AI and building and implementing AI systems, of course, there are quantitative aspects. But we cannot ignore the qualitative aspects. We cannot ignore that we must start from what? The ground, from not the treetops, right? But the grassroots. We must start there, and we must build from there. Co-designing with our communities is so important when we're talking about more transparent technologies and we're talking about the use of AI technologies. And of course, at this time, we know that transparency and trust are very timely topics. Yes, there's an election, more than one. Elections are coming, and so trust and transparency are very much on our minds when we talk about misinformation and disinformation, deep fakes, and when we talk about policy making, whether we're looking at the local level, the state level, the federal level. It is so important to have that trust and transparency in those processes too. And it is very important that AI policies have cross-sector collaboration. We cannot sit in our silos and develop policy, right? We must start from the grassroots, and we must involve all sectors, the public sector, the private sector, the non-profit sector, and academia. Only then can we create policies that are truly worthy of society and that benefit society. We hope that you enjoy the program, and now I will turn the mic over, I guess literally, to our roundtable moderator, Karen Silverman, CEO of the Cantellus Group.
So thank you very much for the warm welcome to UT Austin, and from the Good Systems team, Sherri and Stacy and Leah. I know it's just been a pleasure organizing this with you and pulling the whole panel together, which is diverse, is interesting, and we're going to get right to it. I am the CEO of the Cantellus Group. We've been, we're more on the advisory side. We work with organizations in the public and private sector, really thinking through what the work of technology governance is, right? So we've got principles and policies, and then how do you get those to work in process, to integrate into workflows? How do you manage the human-machine interface in real ways to produce real results that we can trust? And just adding on this wonderful introductory remarks from Professor Greenberg, in our view, trust is a little bit also of a journey, right? You don't start with trust, you earn trust. And what are the steps to earning trust? And what do those steps look like when we're talking about technologies that we've never seen before? So some of the questions we'll get at today is sort of how we want to design that journey for ourselves so that we can understand it and share it and kind of achieve it together. But without further ado, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, and we're going to start, Steve, with you. We're going to start on this end and work our way down with a lightning round. So I'd like you to introduce yourself and tell us either when you first encountered generative AI, what was your first prompt or question to it, or what is your favorite one? Dealer's choice.
Okay, thanks. Oops. Let's see here. Is this working all right? Okay, great. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm Steve Kramer, Chief Scientist at KUNGFU.AI. I did my PhD in physics here under Professor Mike Martyr in chaos theory and nonlinear dynamics way back in 1992. But it's great to be back on campus. And let's see, I think probably my favorite prompt is one that a dear friend and coworker, Reed Cook, came up with. I was a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons growing up. And so he had a great prompt to ChatGPT to create the adventure, involving a wizard, ranger, fighter, across the whole spectrum, to create a compelling and a little bit scary kind of adventure. And it did really, really amazing job. So if you are also inclined in terms of fantasy wargaming, try it out.
Great use case.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay, or should I put it up to me? Up closer. Okay. My name is Vanessa Fuentes. I serve on Austin City Council, and I most recently worked on an AI-related resolution in partnership with Professor Sherri Greenberg. Thank you, Good Systems, for consulting and advising on that resolution. We really positioned the city of Austin to be one of the leaders in how local governments can approach AI. And through that legislation, we are creating AI guidelines for the city of Austin. And this most recent budget cycle, we got some funding included to ensure that we have training and resources available for city employees on how to interact with AI. I can't remember the first AI ChatGPT prompt that I use, but I can tell you one that I used just yesterday. I was with my campaign team, and we were having a campaign event next week, and we wanted to think through what could we name our signature cocktail. So my prompt was, come up with a list of progressive themed cocktails that include mezcal and margaritas. And some of the list, some of the names that it suggested included Unity on the Rocks. I wasn't sure if I wanted that one to be the name of our signature cocktail, but it was fun. And I think it was really, AI can be helpful and creative that way when you're just trying to quickly think of some ideas.
I think we all want to come to your campaign event.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Firth-Butterfield. I am actually a senior research fellow here at UT, and also a visiting scholar at Notre Dame. I hardly do anything for either universities, so I'm very, very grateful that you have me here. In 2014, I was the world's first chief AI ethics officer. So as I said to an international audience the other day, and they all laughed, given that I'm in Austin, this is not my first rodeo with trustworthy AI. I was the head of AI at the World Economic Forum from 2017 to 2023, when I got breast cancer and gave up the job, and since then started Good Tech Advisory. I mainly do sort of education, do a lot of speeches to governments and companies around the world, and also boards, and with Cantellus, advisory work as well. So I'm going to be the party pooper here about using generative AI. I'm very conscious about how much water and how much energy is used when we ask stupid questions of ChatGPT or Claude, and how many of us don't ask stupid questions. So I've been trying to ask sensible, important questions. Today, as I said, I have breast cancer. I am totally better, so that's good. Thank you. But today, I saw a different doctor, and I've been struggling with the pills that the oncologist gave me. And the different doctor said, why don't you take these pills, but check it with your oncologist first? So my oncologist is very resistant to me suggesting things. But she and I are actually working on a paper on AI and oncology together. And so I wrote to her and I said, I'd like to take these pills, and I've checked it with Claude and ChatGPT, and they said, yes, but what do you, the human oracle, say? And she wrote, she's doing the Harvard Grand Rounds today, and she wrote back to me almost immediately and said, I say yes too. So that's my story. Consensus.
Hi, I'm Ken Fleischmann. I'm a professor in the School of Information, the I School, here at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm also the founding chair of Good Systems Ethical AI at UT Austin. Also the founding director of our undergraduate informatics major in the I School that we launched in the fall of 2021, and also the founding editor-in-chief of the ACM Journal on Responsible Computing. So I guess my first time I can remember applying generative AI in my teaching, I'm teaching a 506 student course in ethics in AI for the new Masters in AI that UT launched in this spring of 2024. And when I was designing the course for the first offering in the spring, I had designed that students were required to use generative AI for their assignment. So I was testing it out in advance. So I had students complete an essay, which previously I had asked students to write themselves, where they would come up with an AI ethics dilemma. And also they would pick 3 of the ethical theorists. We cover 10 different ethical perspectives, half of which are non-Western, 1 is feminist. It's a very global, contemporary perspective on ethics. So choose any 3 of those ethical theorists and do this sort of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure of bringing them forward in time to see what they would think about this AI ethics dilemma, how they might reason through this AI ethics dilemma. And so instead of having the students do that exercise, I have the students through prompt engineering get generative AI to do that. I think the funniest one was I had a student who decided to put me as one of the ethical theorists, which I have to admit I had not contemplated that possibility. And I actually sent that to Sam Baker, who's one of our also founding GSET members and another past chair. And so the student had published it as a blog, actually. And so Sam was like, well, do you ever use pluralism in your work? I'm not sure that I've ever seen you use the word pluralism. So I sent him a paper that I think the student had input for me that had pluralism in the title. And one of my former doctoral students I sent it to, and he said, well, I couldn't authoritatively say that you didn't write this, Ken. So I thought that was, certainly that sort of degree to which you can, spoof people to that degree is quite an impressive capability for good or for ill.
And for early versions of what we're about to see. So actually, I'm going to stick with you, Ken, when you get a sip of water, but because that's a really good jumping off place, because I think where we want to start this conversation is exploring a little bit the relationship between transparency, trust, and agency, as Professor Greenberg set it out, minding the fact that where you stand sort of depends on where you sit, right? And all the different kinds of personas that could come into that. So do you want to kick us off? And I'm going to invite the rest of the panel to participate in each of these, but also just for each one of you to kick off a different chapter. So chapter 1, go.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks, Karen. Yeah. Building on what Sherri was saying. So definitely I agree with Sherri that transparency is the basis for forming informed trust judgments. So if you're given a black box and this was actually a paper that I published in Communications of the ACM in 2005. It was during an AI winter, so it was about transparency and computational modeling. If it hadn't been an AI winter and I'd put AI in the title, it might have a few more citations, but okay, it is what it is. And so in that paper, we talk about the scenario where you have a working professional who's been good at their job for 20 years. Now they're given an AI model, and they're asked to follow whatever the AI model recommends. And if that is an opaque black box model where they don't understand the reasoning behind it, they're just forced to make an uninformed trust judgment about whether or not to trust the system. That's really putting them in a bad situation. Like Sherri was talking about, it's taking away their agency, among other things. So now the agency is going to the system. And they could be potentially, if the system is saying to do something and they go against it and they're right, they're going to be seen as like a risk taker. And if the system said to do something, they do the opposite thing and it turns out the system was right, they're probably fired. So it's really not a good situation to put human beings in, especially skilled professionals. So it's really important when we're asking people to use AI-based systems, they have some basis to understand how the AI works. I think that understanding how the AI works, there's the AI, there's the human, you probably need to meet somewhere in the middle. So, certainly there are these great efforts to bring computational thinking and coding and AI literacy into K through 12, which I think is absolutely critical. Actually, we have a project in collaboration with Navarro High School. It's funded by the Institute for Museum and Library Services, where we're actually building an AI literacy curriculum for high school students. Not just, certainly we hope that some of these students will go into STEM careers, but we think even, of course, if you're going to work in logistics, you have to realize that your performance is going to be evaluated by AI and you might be fired by the algorithm. If you are applying for a job at a big box store, your application is probably reviewed by AI first. You might be not hired because of a decision made by the algorithm. So that's even a worse aspect, like to not even understand where AI is being used is like the worst case in terms of transparency to the user, to not even be aware of the use of AI. And that's actually a good example of when I say user there, of course, this person is not directly interacting with the system with their knowledge. So they're someone who's affected by the system. But it's not just the end user that's affected by the system. It's many, many people that are affected by systems. It's, ProPublica has done extensive research on the racial bias in sentencing decisions that are informed by the Compass system, which was originally designed for helping parole officers manage their caseload, but it's now being used by judges as an input into their prison sentencing. And because it's based on decades of racist judges in a systemically racist society, it also is rendering racist recommendations. And so this is a real issue if you don't understand the limitations of the system, or if it's someone who's being sentenced, they, again, probably don't even realize. The judge may not say, I used the Compass system, it's recommending this sentence, and so I decided to give the sentence. They're just going to say, here's the sentence. So we're not even aware of all the ways that AI is being used, in many cases, against us. So I think it's critically important in terms of transparency, first of all, that we have an awareness of when AI is being used, that if we are the end user of the AI, or even if we're someone affected, we have some understanding of how AI works. And again, that meeting in the middle thing. So it's great to do that outreach to K-12. We do want to increase that. We're not going to get to where everyone's a computer scientist in the world. And I love my computer science colleagues in the room, but I'm not sure that we want everyone to be a computer scientist either. So I think that we need to meet in the middle. We need to, at the same time, improve the AI literacy of the general population, but we have to find ways to better explain. I think we can use the model of Creative Commons for, Creative Commons, for example, has taken the idea of intellectual property, which usually there are such incredibly complex legal terms, and most people don't even know to choose how to put things in the public domain, how to leave things open to be changed. So the idea of Creative Commons was, okay, now you can actually choose. There's a human-readable version, there's a machine-readable version, and when I say there's a lawyer-readable version, there's a end user, you and me version, and then there's a machine-readable version. So I think that we need algorithms to have a computer scientist readable version, in the case of work that Sherri and I are doing currently, a skilled trade worker level of version if it's something that a skilled trade worker is going to use. And so that's really critical. Otherwise, and I think the goal is not for every person to trust every AI. I've already given some examples of some pretty untrustworthy, problematic, biased AIs. The goal is to allow people to make informed and appropriately calibrated trust judgments. We're not trying to get people to trust every company or every anything. Like, you should be able to make informed judgments based on a track record, based on your understanding, based on some information. So we need to be able to provide that information to people to inform their decisions.
Thank you. That actually leads me right to your question, so I'm going to switch up. I'm going to open it up in a minute to the panel, but I want to go, both because we're both recovering lawyers, and even we can't read a lot of these terms. Anyway, I'm also, you know better and I know better, but I'm going to ask you a compound question anyway. We just heard about the role of humans and the importance of thinking about transparency and trust from the perspective of the human who's going to consume the information. Could you tell us about sort of your thoughts and learning on the role of humans in oversight, where they should be sort of inserted or make sure that they are inserted, and also where that request becomes burdensome? Like, where does that become a counterproductive obligation or requirement?
Well, I like to tell stories, and as you might have noticed when I started, I like to tell stories because I think they're great examples for you and help you to think. So let's start with a large airline company that has decided that all of its complaints will be answered by generative AI. And it will continue to employ one or two people to read the letters that generative AI has created to make sure that they're not wrong. So that's human oversight. How do we feel about that? Do you want to be the human doing that job? I don't see any hands up. Absolutely. What do you think if you are the customer and you find out that you're receiving a letter from an AI system rather than a person? How do you feel about that company? Sorry? You wouldn't like it. Yeah, absolutely. And doesn't this then bring to the fore everything that we're talking about here? Do you want to trust this company to really care about you? Is it really caring about you if it's using AI to write those letters? Would you want to be the human in the loop there? No, none of you would. So this is a fundamental problem for us in thinking about, when is human oversight essential? I would say human oversight is essential of those complaint letters, if that's the way that you're going. But how do you make that a good interaction, a good thing for your humans that you employ? So to get back to the question, when is human oversight essential? I would say throughout the process of design, development, and deployment. And I want to just give you another story. I sit on the board of an organization, it's a non-profit called Earth Species. We are using AI in order to work out what whales say to one another. That's really cool, isn't it? Okay, so we went into that thinking, oh, great, we'll be able to find out what whales say to one another. We will give them a voice at the table in conversations around conservation. What could be better? We know that when women had a voice, we got the vote. This is groundbreaking stuff for conservation. Now, we actually know a few words that whales use. One of them is dive. We can protect whales from getting run over by big boats and things by asking them to dive. Great. But we will also take them away from what they are naturally doing, like feeding at that moment or looking after their babies at that moment. And so if, for example, we discovered what the word "come here" was, would we be open sourcing that? And so what started out as something that was really important and useful for whales has now become a bit of an ethical nightmare for us. And this is with me on the board and also Asa Raskin on the board. And so it's so important that you think about these throughout the process, because if you don't, you aren't going to you're going to find yourself in the situation that you don't want to find yourself. And if we imagine that this was not whales but people, we would be in the process of putting out a product that actually was not beneficial at all. So design, development, and then use. And the other thing I would say is training. Everybody, and this echoes what Ken was saying, everybody needs to understand AI 101, not how to become computer scientists. But how can you get people to trust something that they don't actually understand, that they don't know about? So the first thing I would be doing if I was a politician and I had some money to throw at it would be training. So when I'm talking to boards and companies, I'm actually saying the first thing you should do is training. Then the people who might be using the algorithms, your employees who might be using the algorithms, will understand it better, will trust it more, and then might actually get their heads round augmenting their careers with this technology. So I probably talked a lot. Do you want me to go on to the specifics?
I always want you to go on, but I think we're going to open the floor just for a minute for a panel. Yes, we're going to come right back to you. But first, I wanted to see if you guys have some reactions to what Ken and Kay have already kind of put on the table.
I think the only thing I would add in the question around why it matters to have transparency and strong oversight systems in place at each stage of artificial intelligence is the why. You know, especially I represent the area of Austin where it's a predominantly Latino community. Nearly 70% Latino families live in my district. And when we think about how technology has had a disproportionate impact on communities of color, that's why there's such a mistrust in new technology. Ken referenced the criminal justice system, which we know is ripe with historical inequities and disproportionate impact throughout the system overall. But the way AI has come online, it intersects with surveillance, right? And so we know when we stand up these systems and they are scraping the webs and they're taking videos and capturing motion and whatnot, all of that technology and gathering the data, what that looks like tangibly is, for example, here in Texas, we have an abortion ban. And as part of that abortion ban, there's a number of laws in place that actually criminalize if you're an individual that helps another individual get an abortion. And when cities, including Austin, we have a license plate reader program, when they can take a look at your license plate to identify an individual, that's evidence that's being captured to help in the prosecution of abortion as a crime. So that is really, really scary for people that live in our city and that live in our state. The other thing is we know that with this type of surveillance, it also has a disproportionate impact on our immigrant community. So how data interacts and how that will impact our immigrant community is also top of mind. So that's why I just wanted to highlight where the mistrust comes from and why it's important that we are transparent and how, especially in the public sector, how we're utilizing AI, and that we have an oversight system that has humans involved in it so that we can safeguard. And it's a rapidly evolving technology, so having oversight, particularly on the deployment, implementation of AI, is absolutely key because we have to stay on top of it. We have to ensure that that we have community voices involved in the oversight system is going to be essential.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, really great points all around. And I just want to reemphasize the importance of the multi and interdisciplinary engagement sort of across not just the people who are building the AI systems, but communities that could be affected. Think about the people whose data sets are collected, like was there consent involved? Are there biases that need to be mitigated? Going back to Ken, back to your the policing and the crime-related example that you shared. No, I think there's been a lot of progress because we've talked about both, social, political, legal, and regulatory frameworks, as well as advances in terms of technical ways of monitoring. So a lot of the models now are getting much better at coming back with sort of confidence intervals, predictions, and ways of essentially even highlighting to human users areas in which, okay, no, wait, this is way outside of what I've been trained on, sort of coming back, this is outside the bounds. But that's why keeping the humans in the loop is really, really important as well. I do think that it's important to realize that unlike maybe some previous technologies that because these systems can evolve, we've actually seen competing chatbots essentially co-infect each other essentially. And so the problem is that these systems are released in the wild without the regulatory frameworks and guidelines. There's that potential for the systems to really significantly degrade over time. So it's not just, you can't just release it once, you have to continually monitor it and make sure that the models adapt to the conditions. And especially in scenarios where the models could be subject to adversarial attacks. where there are adversaries who want to destabilize, who could potentially look at disrupting, supply chains, disrupting power systems. So huge concerns. As I always go back to say, obviously, tremendous benefits from various applications of AI, and as well as the risk that you absolutely have to be keep track of.
Yeah, which is actually another. There's a question I wanted to ask you that you've sort of teed up, so thank you. And that is that we are all of us confronted a lot by a whole raft of what I would sort of call false choices, right? That we get privacy or security, that we can have innovation or governance. And you're describing sort of a scenario where governance is sort of essential to turning out good and innovative product that is robust, safe, and sort of survives, right, the environment. Can you talk a little bit about how, from that position of trust and transparency, governance and innovation are sort of braided together, and they're not these sort of oppositional constructs that we hear so much about, particularly as it gets reported as that these are sort of mutually exclusive, and that's not really how it works.
Yeah, I mean, you could absolutely have the safest thing is not to do anything at all, right? But obviously, because certainly across, looking globally, many of the countries, including adversaries, are definitely. But that doesn't mean like, okay, well, it's no holds barred. Just go ahead. So I think once again, by starting with those sort of algorithmic accountability frameworks that I know that folks at Google and Responsible AI had helped promulgate starting back in 2020, that's one strong way of doing that. I would say that. Oh, we got a little music going on.
The accompaniment.
Yeah. What I would say is that, okay. Stand by. Cocktail hour is about to start.
It's very soothing.
It is. It's quiet.
Thank you. Do you want me to keep hitting a button so that it doesn't? Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Right. And so I think part of it, too, is also understanding sort of like what the specific use case would be. So obviously, and this goes back to the trustworthy angle as well, like if you show someone a less than optimal digital ad, right? Like think about Amazon or Netflix. Obviously, very low impact as opposed to like a critical decision like a self-driving car or a healthcare diagnosis. So the important thing is to provide sort of to basically marry up the level of trustworthiness with the severity of the application area. And then you progress along. You like try something. And the other thing too I would highly recommend is don't go with a single model. In fact, I was just at the AI conference last week in San Francisco, and big themes were graph RAG for retrieval augmented generation, because literally everyone says never ever use an LLM by itself for pretty much almost any application. And the other one is agentic systems. So using a combination of systems and ideally complementary algorithms in conjunction, and that way you might have a voting mechanisms. You might say only if 3 out of the 5 vote, this is a situation. So I think those kinds of tools can really be helpful in those regards.
That's fantastic. What do you think about, I'm just going to ask you and then the rest of the panel, in other areas where we think about defense and restraint and governance, or just sort of building it in, we also think about layers of defense, right? We've got the systems that we build into the technology, we've got the ways we combine technologies, and we've got the ways that we kind of govern the people who are in and around the technologies. Have you guys seen good examples of that sort of layered approach that you've seen work, or is that still under construction? Yeah.
And I was reading, there's a really, and we're happy to, if we'll be sharing any of the slides or stuff after this, there's a really great AI governance paper that came out of, I think it was Finland last year, the hourglass model. It really sort of highlighted both the end-to-end aspect of AI governance as well as sort of those nuances of the socio-tactical, the legal, the more sort of machine learning specific, like there's ways of cryptographically, vetting that a system has not been compromised. So those are ways to make some progress there as well.
Yeah, and I would just add to it, when we think about how it's integrated, particularly from a public sector workforce lens, that is part of the resolution that we initiated, includes getting recommendations back from our advisory council. Our state legislature is also convening. They have an interim charge on this very topic where they have a statewide advisory council to provide recommendations. So certainly that topic of what it looks like is top of mind for policymakers, because one of the risks with AI and one of the concerns that we hear from our workforce is, could AI be a job replacement? Is it going to have a displacement effect on our workforce? And certainly we would want to know any unintended consequences with it. So recommendations to come.
Thank you. Do you guys have any examples or cautionary tales you want to?
I always
know you
have
do, but yeah.
cautionary tales, but no, I just wanted actually to come back to this transparency and trust issue. And, there was a survey done by Oxford University and the BBC and Reuters in May, and it showed that 47% of Americans hadn't even heard of ChatGPT, and even less had heard of any of the other LLMs. So I think that it's really hard for us to sit here and talk about trust and transparency with a workforce that Vanessa was just talking about, whose only exposure seems to be, oh dear, it's going to take my jobs. And so we do have to be much better at navigating that bridge between those of us who know about it and those of us who don't. Sorry, that was
No. It's actually a perfect segue to the Councilwoman, but I just want to ask Ken quickly if he has anything else he wants to. No, we're going to go. Okay. So with that, so when you think about your constituency, technically or more broadly speaking, what makes you most hopeful about all of this? What are you most worried about, and where should we start the engagement?
Well, part of my concerns is wanting to ensure that we are democratizing the data and the information as part of this new technology. So ensuring that everyone has access, that people have access not only to the technology itself, but to the training, the resources to become familiar with, how to put in a prompt and how to ask it the right way or creative ways to do so. I'm excited and hopeful for AI because of just from a public service lens, the benefit and value it adds to our community. Here are a few ways that we at the City of Austin have been using AI. Austin Energy, our power utility, has been using it to do early wildfire detection so that we can get to those wildfires quicker. So it's been great on safety. We've also used it for road and safety measures. In fact, we have 3D cameras who are able to provide, or they're able to see when an elderly or someone with a disability is using a signal and delay that signal to give them more time to walk across the street. So that's another powerful way that AI is being utilized by our city. So there are some really incredible aspects to how we can integrate it as a public sector. But concerns, of course, is the racial biases that we're seeing and how the data is collected. And even, we reference the criminal justice system, we reference immigrant rights and reproductive health, but also from a financial lender perspective, we're seeing algorithmic redlining happening. So when Black and brown individuals are applying for mortgage loans, they're getting charged more, and early studies are showing this. So again, we really have to ensure that we are safeguarding and being transparent in how we're collecting the data and how it's being utilized.
Thank you. Comments, observations, and then I'm going to ask you how you think regulation can feed into this, but I want to just...
Well, I have to talk about data, don't I?
You must.
I have to talk about data. And
Nancy's looking right at you, yes.
I have to talk about data and what Vanessa just said about democratizing data and use, and LLMs. So I want you to think about whether LLMs do actually democratize AI and who they democratize AI for. Can anyone tell me how many people are unconnected to the internet in our world?
In our world?
In our world, globally.
9 billion people. How many?
There are 9 billion people in the world and 3 billion are unconnected. So when you're using an LLM, you're already not using data from everybody. You are already cutting out 3 billion people. When did women start to provide data in any significant amount? Well, I don't know. Perhaps Jane Austen started writing some books in England in 1815 or so. But when did we actually start producing a lot of data? Not until really quite recently, because we weren't in jobs until really quite recently. It wasn't until 1965 that women in America were actually allowed to be part of medical studies. So that means that if you are using LLMs, the data that you're using is actually fundamentally flawed to begin with. It isn't democratized data. And if I were to ask when persons of color actually had the pen and created data, we would be, perhaps if we were lucky, in the 60s, 50s or 60s. So we have a lot of work to do to actually be able to say this democratizes data and this democratizes AI for everyone.
Agreed. And it raises, or sort of begs a really important question for you, Ken, which is, obviously, it matters very much what you intend to use technology, any of these technologies we're talking about for, right? And then, of course, what data feed the technology that you're using for the specific purpose. Can you sort of just illuminate for us sort of examples where the kinds of problems that Kay is raising could become a big problem, and the other use cases for which maybe it's less of a problem? Like, what kinds of use cases do these problems really implicate, so we should be paying special attention to the transparency and trust dimensions?
Yeah, thanks, Karen.
Thanks.
So building on Kay's great point, I would say that first we have to put AI in relation to a wide range of information and communication technologies. And the idea of AI being a democratizing force, as enticing as that is, the radio was thought of as a potentially democratizing technology. And indeed, it turned out to be a one-to-many broadcast format. Television, especially public access television, was thought of probably the only public access television that a lot of people can think of as like fake ones, like Wayne's World or something like that. The internet was thought of as a democratizing force in society. Social media was thought of as a democratizing force in society. We've seen how billionaires are still controlling these platforms, despite this idea that it would be a democratizing force. So it seems that powers intervene anytime there's a new disruptive technology that seems like it might suddenly, overturn the current power structures and create democracy in society, that actually it winds up, in most cases, reinforcing the existing power hierarchies in society. So, certainly leaving things alone, I would expect the same thing with AI, that it would be reinforcing the same power inequities in society. And indeed, everyone on the panel has made some, really excellent points about the degree to which that's already, in terms of Councilmember Fuentes' point about constituents being tracked and surveilled in these various problematic ways, that is, really problematic, anti-democratic application of this technology. So, I think, and it's really, it's what might seem inconsequential initially can actually turn out to be quite consequential. So I'm sure the use case that was provided for, for installing those license plate readers was, what if there's a terrorist? What if there's a murderer? What if there's some, but then it gets used and applied in all of these use cases. That, I mean, this again, with the Compass system, they went beyond the original use case. With the Challenger space shuttle accident, what happened was they used it outside of the safe operating parameters. There were engineers from Morton Thiokol who were saying, don't launch, don't launch, don't launch. And the corporate and NASA went ahead and launched anyway, and it was destroyed. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the future and what the implications of an AI-based system that seems benign, that seems, kind of inconsequential today, could have really major implications down the road.
Could become that way, which gets us to regulation and why that's so hard, right? Because what are we regulating? Are we regulating the technology? Are we regulating the use case? Are we regulating the people who are making up the use cases, right? So with that really simple question, I was going to turn it over to the Councilwoman to talk just about regulation and the role of it and how you're thinking about that with the help of a lot of the good people in this room. To what's effective regulation look like at this point in time, also knowing it could change?
Yeah, so we know there's some exciting movement at the federal level. They are considering a couple of different pieces of legislation. I say this kind of sarcastically because it's hard to get anything through Congress at this point. So really? We'll see how long it takes, but we know that at least some legislations have been filed. One of them, the Defiance Act, is around safeguarding and protecting one's image and likeness. And we know that there have been a number of instances where photos are created using either policymakers, celebrities, et cetera, without their consent. And so that act will add some protections for individuals. So the other legislation is around creating parameters and regulations around how the U.S. government utilizes procurement and how they engage in what ways they engage through their procurement, through their contract systems with other vendors. And that's what we're trying to do here locally, is also establish guidelines for how the city of Austin works with outside entities, ensuring where we get protections on data privacy and data sharing. So there's movement at the local level. I'm more hopeful that we'll have some tangible results to talk about and examples of how we're able to regulate. And then at the federal level, there's been legislation filed. At the state level, they're also considering it through this interim. So we anticipate the next legislative cycle that we'll have some additional examples to get at. But the other area I wanted to mention that AI is being looked at from policymakers at all levels is from a workforce standpoint. So looking at how are we integrating our workforce development, how are we integrating AI in our workforce development strategies and programs. So either in our schools, K through 12, also in college, and how are we utilizing it to train our public sector workforce. So it's still, and it's very, you all know, government moves pretty slow with things, but it's in the works, and hopefully in the upcoming year we'll have more examples to provide.
And I think the regulation that's under discussion in a lot of these forums is instructive. Even if it's not passing, it's instructive, and it's sort of setting a public conversation. So in the spirit of transparency, I'm going to ask one more lightning round of this group, and then we're going to open it up to you guys for questions. So be thinking about those. Lightning round. Start with Steve.
Okay.
If you could identify sort of one problem that if you could just make it go away and unlock this problem for us, what would that be? You don't have to know what the solution is, but what if you could wave a magic wand, what problem would you make go away so we could sort of tackle trust and transparency more completely?
I would have to say the climate change impact of these large AI models and just the continuing thirst of the large proprietary model providers to continue to push that. It's just absolutely unsustainable. And fortunately, from a technical perspective, smaller and smaller models are doing really well. You don't really need a GPT-4 for many use cases. So that's kind of top of mind for me, is just like the current path of bigger and bigger models that just take up tremendous amounts of energy is just absolutely unsustainable. So that would be the biggest thing. If we could wave a magic wand, I would say, let's fix that.
Everybody should get a magic wand once a week.
Yeah.
Love the magic wand. Mine would be community education and advocacy. And it's the point that was made earlier. less than half of Americans know about AI, know about this as a tool. And so to me, that would be number one. How are we ensuring that people know about it? How they can use it? And then, of course, building trust with it as well.
I think for me, it's deep fakes. Deep fakes are pernicious. Deep fakes affect our children, from bullying right through to our politicians, to our celebrities, to potentially you and me, and also to our businesses. You know, there's the famous case now of the poor woman in Hong Kong who parted with $25 million because she was in a video conference with everybody else as a deep fake. They were her people she knew, but they were all deep fakes. So I think if we could get rid of deep fakes, we would be doing society and democracy and business a great deal of benefit.
I'd say explainability of neural nets. So currently, it's really hard to be able to render in human terms why a neural net is making the prediction that it's making. So that wouldn't solve the transparency issue by itself, but it would be a really fundamental technical innovation that could help to solve that problem, which in partnership with the kind of outreach and education efforts could make a difference in the world.
So I think we have a game plan, right? That's when. So questions from the audience? Starting here.
First of all, thank you everyone for this talk. It's awesome. There was some talk about how you can use multiple different kinds of LLMs to kind of sort of offset each other, and then there's various like sort of equitable considerations with LLMs. But to me, it seems like it all comes back to the data that goes in. So pretty much all of them use largely the same data set, and as these LLMs are generating more content, the content that then gets used to train them is more uniform and generated by other AI, so exponentially increasing certain voices. So I'm curious what role regulating the data in, or perhaps monitoring the data in, has to play, and I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'm going to turn that to Ken and to Steve in the first instance. And do you guys?
Do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, I absolutely agree. There's actually a really compelling recent study that talks actually about, I think they call it model collapse, that actually shows that just the degradation of the model's performance when there's this feedback cycle with only synthetic data, or just like the output from other models. But I think let's go back to transparency. There's a great project called, if you go, I think it's called datagovernance.org, that actually tracks all of this, source data sets, the licenses applied. I've done a little bit of work trying to use network graph techniques basically to map out those kinds of things, because in some cases it's not just, you can't look at just the software license for the model training code. It's also sometimes there are separate licenses for the weights and also separate licenses for the data sets. And there might be one case where there's a data set that was for research use only, which means that, okay, any of things that have been used downstream from that can't be used for commercial applications. But I would point especially to the recent Microsoft Phi 3.5 models that have shown with just much higher quality, smaller data sets, that you can get really great results with much smaller models. And so that would be one of my things, just the emphasis on higher quality data. Same thing for Databricks. They've done some great with their DBRX models as well. So I'd check out those examples.
Okay, Kenneth.
Okay, so what I think you're talking about is something that we call cannibalism. And so basically the algorithm is eating its own data and therefore learning from that data. So one of the things that we should be cognizant of is that by this time next year, AI will be generating more data than we are. And so we will get stuck in this loop if we're not careful. In terms of regulation, yes, there needs to be some regulation, but most of the regulation people think of as AI regulation. Don't go back to the data. So yes, we need some regulation on data. There is, of course, a law called copyright law, which isn't going terribly well. So one wonders how much it actually provides this great dilemma, doesn't it, between the power of companies, of big companies, to just do what they are doing and give indemnities against copyright problems to their users, versus the system that has been in place for a long time. And what we're seeing play out is the large company and the forces of state. And I don't know which way we're going to end up.
And if I could just add, it's going to be important for governments to work with the private sector, with companies. And one example that we have here in Austin, we have autonomous vehicles operating in our city. We're not able at the local level to regulate autonomous vehicles, but we have approached one of the companies to ask, since the autonomous vehicles, they have cameras that are monitoring our streets in real time and all the time, can we have access to what they're capturing, so that if there is a roadway obstruction, if we need to go clear a scooter, that the city can mobilize and quickly quickly resolve any issues when it comes to road safety. And so that's one way we're partnering with a private company in the betterment and protection of our community.
And you raise a really good point about the public-private partnerships are going to increase, and the forms they take are going to multiply and be really innovative, honestly. So that's very cool. Other questions? Hands up. I'm going to go way to the back first.
So we could say that we have the most transparent, ethical AI systems in place. We've magically regulated it. Everything is magical and rainbows. And the question is, as we expand these use cases and expand dependency on more and more critical decisions, how can different countries ensure that? I mean, I've had this personal experience. I was working on a programming assignment where I didn't know the language that I was working on, and then ChatGPT was down for 30 minutes, and I was paralyzed, right? But imagine that in some sort of hospital situation, in something where the issue was not that my website looked ugly. So I think how can you guys, or what are your suggestions to government and to companies in order to implement these systems while ensuring consistency and stability?
That is an excellent question, and really goes to a lot of risk and resiliency debates and conversations that are happening right now, sort of as we speak. Who wants to start?
I think it goes to what I call grey mush. If we allow these systems to do everything for us, we will simply end up with grey mush, and we won't be able to step up when we need to. You'll be paralyzed for 30 minutes or more. And I'd just like to take a step back to, I guess, a more analog system, but maybe not. My daughter's a pilot in the US Air Force, and they make her do simulated flying the whole time. Why do they do that? Well, they can throw all sorts of problems at her, so that even though the plane is generally being flown by a computer, when she needs to, she can step in. And so probably that's what we need to be able to do. We need to make a decision. If you look at Star Trek, the people are still flying the plane. And the computer, even though it's spectacularly clever, is chipping in ideas. We need to decide what sort of world we want vis-a-vis human and AI in order to address the problem that you just raised.
Yeah, I completely agree, Kay, that absolutely part of it is not being so dependent on the technology. We also really have to harden our infrastructure. And especially there are many state and non-state actors that have malevolent intent who, when they gain access to systems, can do a lot of harm. And so I think that's critical for our government systems, for corporate systems. Actually, It's also important for nonprofits and community organizations often get targeted because there aren't necessarily the resources to invest into cybersecurity and hardening the infrastructure. So the UT Austin iSchool has a partnership with the Strauss Center here on campus where we offer a cybersecurity clinic. In the first semester, the students learn the principles of cybersecurity. In the second semester, they go out and work in partnership with a community organization to harden the cyber infrastructure of that community organization to ensure they would be more able to block any kinds of cyber attacks or any kind of malicious action. So it's really important we harden all of our cyber infrastructure, all of our organizations, but including nonprofits, not just industry and government.
Right. And I was just going to say, too, especially if you, for your particular use case, can go to the smaller models, you can actually containerize everything so things can be run absolutely with no internet connection at all. So I think that's another as part of this whole failover planning.
Okay, so, and I'm going to come back to you, Councilwoman. Where do we get the money to invest in all of that?
You're right. I mean, it's going to be challenging for policymakers because, as you all know, we have competing priorities. You know, we're trying to ensure that we have funding for our parks and to have smooth streets and to have services for our unhoused community. So certainly, it is going to become challenging for local governments. But I think this is another area where we can do some public-private partnerships and work together on.
Yeah. And really, I think part of that partnership is setting priorities, right? Is how do we do that? We have time for another question or two. Gentleman here, and then woman in the back, and if we have three, we'll come over here.
Yeah, thanks. I'll make mine quick. Just while we're on the topic of hardening, I know that Cantellus Group and KUNGFU do a lot of consulting for companies trying to get set up on AI. What are you guys telling them to do for security to prevent all of these new and novel threat vectors?
I would say that obviously understanding, like, first of all, what the use case is, so what kind of models will be required. And then we're actually starting to do some work around basically then just doing a complete inventory of like all the sort of third-party software requirements. And then, basically you need to make sure that if some new version of some model comes out and there's been a compromise, you can quickly identify which things might be. And that's on top of all the typical cybersecurity that you would want for any sort of enterprise software deployment as well. But I think for AI systems, it's also important just the data sets. For KUNGFU, we've gotten to do some great work for a company called Clarity, where we're building the AI models that estimate the future risk of breast cancer. And so we've been able to do that using sequencing mammograms from separate hospitals. But of course, that's the whole thing of like balancing privacy with security. So everything is kept completely separate. So the data from data sets, we're using federated learning as well as differential privacy to make sure you can never go back and reconstruct the original sensitive data. So it's all possible using techniques like that, but you really have to plan for and budget for that from the outset.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really complicated question, but I think the more you can bring that into the design, the better it goes, and the more you understand that the people are part of that design in addition to the data and the technology, the better it goes. So we sort of try to tackle it from that perspective.
Can I just add one thing about people and AI, because Steve brought up the mammograms, and obviously it's close to my heart. Mammograms are a great example of where AI can do great things. As I said, my oncologist and I are writing a paper together about oncology and AI. And she said to me, wouldn't it be good if we could help you get AI to help you with your journey with cancer? And I turned around to her and said, no, it'd be much better if you could help me with my journey with cancer. But why don't we put AI in your back office so that it can do those jobs that take away your time from your patients? And I think it's those sort of considerations of where do we have humans and where do we have AI, and playing to the strengths of both that is actually so important as we think about these things.
And more concerning, I would say, I mean, that's a great answer, But at my most recent checkup, I asked if the AI was going to read it because I'm curious and I'd like it to. And they said, this is at UCSF, major medical institutions, they said no because the doctors found it distracting. Right? I mean, so this is a workflow problem, right? That's not a technology problem, that's a human workflow problem.
Right. Well, and I'll just one comment about sort of like streamlining. There's a great Austin-based startup called, well, I think they're also Bay Area, Diligent Robotics,
Yeah.
where basically they have robots that can help sort of do secure deliveries of like, lab samples or just equipment. And by doing those deliveries, they can reduce the burden on the nursing staff, and that way the nurses have more time and clinical staff have more time for patients. So just a quick
Which is
shout
generally
out.
what they want to be doing. Anyway.
Right.
All right, one more question, well, two more questions really quickly. Very far in the back, and then we're going to come over here. I know we had one.
Hi, so I really wanted to ask about specifically with transparency, there's the component of trust. So I want to ask about like trustworthiness of AI and machine learning, for example. And I know like a big problem with having this trustworthiness within these algorithms is that a lot of them that are deployed on large scales are proprietary. And a part of being proprietary is that they won't release their training data, for example, and like the functions they use to then create that algorithm. Which means that how do we know their data that's being used is implementing some of the, considering some of the biases, and how do we know that just considering the trustworthiness of what they're doing. So my question is, how do you ensure that transparency going forward with these companies, especially those who are very, who don't really want to reveal that proprietary data? And if it's like things like regulations, like what specifically can we do? For example, like when you were talking about like consent of individuals and their photos, like how do we know that these, like obviously like you can probably guess from these models that these photos are being used, but if they don't actually like be transparent and say that, yes, these are the data that we're training on, we can't say that that's what they're using, for example.
I mean, I think that's why we need Congress to act. Because otherwise, if we have a patchwork of regulations, if here locally in Texas, our municipalities don't have a lot of authority around enacting regulation on private companies, so we wouldn't be able to do much. There probably are some states that can and are doing more on AI, but ultimately we need Congress to take action to regulate and to provide the parameters.
Yeah, because the answer is no, you can't at the moment, and so you need the federal regulation. There are, I think, 30 states, Karen will probably correct me, that have different AI laws nowadays.
36 states?
30 states.
Yeah, that's roughly right, plus a bunch of municipalities and other, I mean, it's a hash out there.
So
I'm
it's a
going to get
mess.
one more question in
Yeah.
from the audience. Okay, there was a question over here somebody had?
Oh, yeah.
I thought so, yeah.
I was wondering your opinion about the regulations here in the U.S. and the NIST framework. What
The NIST framework?
NIST framework. Oh, sorry. There's a
Yeah.
So the NIST, the NIST framework, and okay, we have the EU AI Act, but how do you see the future of regulations of AI systems here in the U.S.?
Well, the NIST framework is it's not a regulation.
I know,
right,
I
okay,
know,
so it's
I know,
Right,
yeah.
okay, so it's
a framework.
It's a framework.
Yes.
But that's important, right? Because now everybody's adapting it. And this is a little bit like the signaling that a lot of these proposed, I mean, in Congress, there's 30 states, but there's like 450 bills that have been proposed in
But
Congress.
do you think like it will evolve, or not the NIST, but we will evolve the conversation here in the U.S. towards a regulation in the future?
I think, personally, I think so. I don't know what, I don't know what shape it will take, and it'll have to be agile, and it'll have to be adaptable to changing conditions. We're not really great at that, but I think that it's going to have to look something like that. But other views on that?
Yeah,
You
I
guys
think,
go.
I believe the Commerce Department is taking a big lead with sort of implementing President Biden's executive order on AI, but obviously the legislation to actually enact that is still critical, so.
Right. And it's very focused on the federal government, which is
Right.
great because it's a big purchaser of technologies, and so I mean it has impact in commercial settings, but it's still a fairly indirect tool. Other?
I wonder if AI is being used to write the policy for AI.
I'm sure someone has tried that and it has, it has eaten itself. They have experimented. Yeah, and it's
writing it, but it's another voice.
yeah. But as with all of these, you know, how you ask the question and what persona you, in what voice do you ask the question, will very much impact the kind of output you get. And so one wonders what AI has asked it about itself. I'm going to be respectful of time, and I also know that we have a sort of a networking and social hour. So I just really want to thank UT for hosting us, and that was amazing. And actually, under the auspices of NIST. Thank you. And thank you also to my Cantellus colleagues who are here, and for us, great number. So thank you. And to the panel, of course.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.